Joining us right now, Representative Mike Rogers, former Representative Mike Rogers of the great state of Michigan. He was also the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and of course now he is with our very own Westwood One and also CNN. Thanks for joining us, Congressman.
Thanks for having me on, Larry, Brian.
So I was incredibly concerned when I saw this story about, well, they're saying 4 million at least, but it's probably many more federal employees' records that had been hacked out of the Office of Personnel Management, and it seems like the origin was China based on all the reports that we're getting. Should I be as concerned as I was? Because it seems to me if they can get into that system, they can have access to terrifying amounts of information that they shouldn't be getting.
Well, what we've seen with the Chinese over a period of time, so they've gone into big healthcare companies and gotten personal information. They've gotten in, obviously, into the OPM system. So these are people that are of interest to their intelligence services for a whole host of reasons. And when you start taking a big look across all of the data that they're trying to compile, it does paint a pretty scary picture. My guess would be that they're putting together the mother of all phishing campaigns, meaning they're going to be able to tailor a message to you, an email to you that sounds so real and so compelling, you're going to click and allow them to breach your firewall and get into your company's network.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. Well, I mean, talk about that for a moment. How could the Chinese exploit data? Let's say, for example, if in their search of Office of Personnel Management records, they got a list of everybody with a top secret security clearance.
Well, it would be more than just the list. So if they were able to get into the files, they would know what your level of clearance was, and it sounds to me, have gotten at least some portion of the investigation itself, which means, people that were interviewed or things that they found or didn't find and all of those kinds of things would go into an investigation, plus your personal information. So they could go back and take that file, for an example, and look at it and say, okay, I know that Brian had way too many speeding tickets in this particular time of his life. I'll take that and say, I'm an insurance company, and we were just looking at your high rate of speeding. We can give you the best deal ever. And
click here.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably a bad one because that's a solicitation for business. They don't have a high openership. Yeah. But if you could tailor that to your person, like this is the court, and by the way, we think there was a mistake, and you need to come back and talk to us, you'd probably click on that.
Let me just follow up with that. I have gotten some hints and suggestions through some back channels that this is something that the federal government has known about, maybe since late last year. You were sort of still there back then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you, 2014 was a bad year for government breaches. A bad year. So the reason, and I would agree that they don't want to disclose this until they get the forensics done, and the forensics on this being who really did do it. And I'll tell you, the Chinese are getting better and better. They beat you by volume. The Russians are technically the best, but the Chinese will beat you by volume. They just keep wave after wave trying to come at you and get into your systems in cyberspace. But they're very getting better at trying to hide their tracks. So you can't really. Is it really the Chinese or is it the Chinese?
I'm sorry. I was going to say. So, based on your answer there, it sounds to me like there are more of these that we don't know about yet that have occurred.
Well, it's safe to say the Anthem case. If you saw that was a few months old. This case, they believed, happened in late last year, and I can say with a high degree of confidence that was likely to have happened in that time frame. Yeah. We know that the Russians have breached our government systems. And so, it's bad and it's getting worse. And we just keep, as American public, we just kind of admire the problem. We go, wow, that's really something they're really good at.
Yeah. And we keep hearing in the headlines, you just did it yourself, the Russians breached this system, and the way this was reported, the Chinese breached that system. From your perspective as when you were the chairman of the Intel Committee and from the national security perspective, do we draw a distinction between Russian mafia and Russian government, between Chinese gangsters that may have done this, or the Chinese government, or if there are business interests that are doing this versus the governments?
Very great question. And what we saw last year, a change, and I won't mention any names, but Russia, the intelligence services are sharing capability with very sophisticated international organized crime groups that use cyber as a means of theft. Yeah. And so we've seen their capabilities just leap forward. in a way that would be really consistent with the way a nation state would operate. That was really very, very concerning. And so we don't think they give them all of it, but we think that there's a weird sharing going on that's really dangerous for all of us in the protection of our data. On the Chinese front, we don't really see that yet. What we have seen in the past is that these really good hackers would work for the government for their 8 or 9 hours a day and then put themselves out in the Chinese market to say, hey, listen, if you want me to steal somebody else's company secrets and you didn't make the Chinese list, the government posted list about, meaning that it may take 2 years for us to get to you, you give me that and you can pay me cash and I'll go on weekends and nights and I'll break into that company and give it to you for, we've saw sums as $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, which is now you've doubled their capacity in a way that's pretty scary.
I'm sort of curious. We've been told that this impacts 4.1 million people, which is a ton of people. But I'm wondering if that's just the tip of the iceberg. Do you suspect that number is going to grow as they continue to do their forensics investigations?
Yeah, and it's important to remember, though, Brian, that it won't impact all 4 million in exactly the same way. In some cases, they may have gotten the entire file. That's bad. Yeah. In some cases, they may have only gotten a piece of the file. They've only gotten around one piece of information. That's still bad, but it's not as bad as getting the entire file. So I think what you're going to find is they're going to try to figure out what did they get for each file, and that is a very time-consuming event in that process.
And I keep hearing these stories that say that, from an IT standpoint, the federal government across the board is just way behind. That, for example, there are still computer systems in use across the board in many different areas of the government that still rely on things like Windows 95.
No doubt about it. They are the worst adopters of technology, especially when it comes to making things more productive inside the halls of government. So they're slow, and their security precautions are not followed all that well. So even if you think about the Department of Defense, they kind of get it. The success rate at phishing emails against personnel in Department of Defense is still shockingly high. And it's because I think that the bad guys are getting better. So if you take that away from defense and the NSA and groups like that are trained and understand that they're targets, and then spread that across the rest of the government, OPM would be a great example. Their security protocols, not that great, and they are using old and outdated software and equipment in many cases. Yeah. And it is absolutely ripe for the picking.
In your opinion, who are the ones in Congress right now who take this seriously and who are really focusing on it and getting it right?
Well, I mean, there's a host of us. The bill that Dutch Ruppersberger and I, who's still there, Dutch is doing a great job on this, trying to keep it alive. The Intel Committee passed a cyber sharing bill, and I think the Senate is working on it. So that group of people, both of those groups of people know the threat, know the problem, and are trying to keep it alive. The problem isn't really in Congress. It's the public debate about it. It's often misinformed.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty scary. The government is getting everything you have, which is just simply not true. And so that political public narrative has really slowed down our government's ability to pass something that is small and effective, and it can at least start pushing back on this. And so, Michael, they've got some good legislation moving through, and I hope this is the impetus to push it across the finish line.
Well, we'll try to keep that public debate going in a sensible way as well. Thanks for helping us do that, Representative Mike Rogers, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.